Sample IELTS speaking interviews. Possible IELTS Band 9.
Hello, my name is Christopher. What's your full name, please?
My name is Jeremy David Hellard.
Can I check your ID and passport, please?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, that's fine. In the first part, I'd like to ask you some general questions about yourself. Let's talk about your work or school. Are you a student or do you work?
I'm a student.
And do you like your school?
Yeah, I like my school. I like studying there, but the actual building, the actual surroundings are nothing special. We tend to call it Strand Poly rather than King's College.
And is there anything you would like to change about your school?
There are certainly a lot of things that could be changed about King's College. To start with, as I said, it's not the most beautiful place, yet it is next to a wonderful London building called Northumberland House, and ours looks drab and black by comparison. And apart from that, we have a very famous war studies department that actually trains a lot of rather dubious dictators and other characters from countries that I would rather not have my university train people from. So there's a couple of issues I think we could change.
Mm-hmm. And how do you travel to school?
I walk across the bridge because I live very close to King's College in Waterloo. So I walk across Waterloo Bridge and see the trail of drips of blood and rather dubious fluids which you see lying on the roads there. So yeah, I walk just a short distance.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's move on to email. How often do you use email?
Email. I tend to use email about once or twice a week just to keep in touch with people who I'm not in the same city as or the same country as at the moment.
And do you think writing an email is better than writing a letter?
I don't think it's better than writing a letter. I much prefer writing and receiving letters. But the emails are so much more useful for immediate communication. So if I really need to get in touch with people, or more than one person at a time, then I might well prefer to use email because it's slightly more efficient in the modern setting.
Okay. Now I'd like to ask you about travel. What countries have you travelled to before?
I've travelled extensively in Europe and Asia, but never outside of these two continents. So I've been to most Western European countries, Germany, France, Spain, Switzerland, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, Czechoslovakia. And in Asia, I've spent most of the time in India, Nepal, Thailand, Laos.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And where wouldn't you like to travel to?
I wouldn't like to go to Los Angeles or the suburban sprawl around that area. I would love to go to the United States for a lot of reasons, but I think that absolute height of modern suburbanization that is Los Angeles County is something that I would rather never see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's move on to part 2. In part 2, I will give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you will have 1 minute to think about what you are going to say. You may make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
I understand, yes.
Okay, so here's your topic. I'd like you to describe a problem in your city.
Well, I think the main problem that I see with London is congestion of traffic. Because despite all of the new congestion laws which have been installed in recent times, I find that the very nature of London is that it is an old city, about 1,000 or 2,000 years old in its present size and sprawl. Obviously, it's grown a little, but it is designed around the idea of having horses and carts, ponies and traps, trundling through the cobbled streets, saying good morning to each other in a nice English style. But now we have thousands and thousands of jeeps, sports utilities vehicles, and other oversized vehicles which were designed for American ranches driving through our cities. So London in particular, as you get to the centre, it becomes a complete gridlock where you breathe diesel fuel all the time, and when you get home you will blow black dust out of your nose. So I think, although there are a lot of other problems in the metropolitan situation, I tend to find that in London it's definitely the overflow of vehicles and people who decide, rather than using the public transport, that they want to take their own car and listen to their own music on their own stereo system. So basically, I think this is the nature of the problems with my city.
Okay, and are you optimistic that the situation will improve?
No, not really. They're trying, as I say, they've installed congestion charges and laws to prevent it from happening. But people will just shoulder that cost. People will simply say, I have to pay £5 more each time I go to town. So they will pay £5 more. But the problem remains until they pedestrianise the centre of the city.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to part 3. You've been talking about a problem in your city, and I'd like to ask you 1 or 2 more questions related to this. So let's consider first of all the development of cities. Could you examine the causes of urbanization?
Well, the causes of urbanization are basically the Industrial Revolution, which started, I suppose, in English cities. But when London's East End started to industrialize, then obviously they need hundreds of thousands of workers to run the factories and the massive infrastructure of the port city, which is London, which for certainly a century or so was one of the busiest ports in the entire world. So the amount of people who had to come from the British countryside or from other countries altogether, often places which had been previously colonized by Britain, these people were all drawn towards the center of industry, and therefore we get 2 things happening. One is a massive overcrowding, and therefore a likeliness for easily transmitted diseases or just a lack of cleanliness that you might find in a food market with too many rats. But the other side of the problem is so many communities who are entirely different in their culture and outlook, living next door to each other. And sometimes this works very well, but other times we can see eruptions of sporadic violence or malcontent amongst different social groups.
And could you speculate on how cities will develop in the future?
I think cities will probably develop upwards in the same way as we've seen in American cities, that buildings will become taller with better security guards and more windows, so that people can live in the city with the convenience of the local 7-Eleven without having to encounter the chock-a-block street-side life that you will find in any modern metropolis.
Okay, and let's talk about some global issues. Could you describe how noticeable the gap between the rich and the poor is in your country?
Well, yes, it's certainly very noticeable, and I would quote a prominent conservative politician who said, "The homeless, oh, they're the people we step over when we come out of the opera." So in London particularly, and also Manchester and Birmingham, you can really see a lot of people who are sleeping in the street on newspapers, whilst right next to them are extremely wealthy London bankers or Arab oil men, people with chauffeurs, people to carry the back of their coat over the homeless people so as not to tarnish it. So I think it's very obvious the difference between rich and poor, particularly if you go closer to the centre of urbanized areas.
And how worried are you about rising world temperatures?
Well, I think it's certainly worrying, the trend of global warming, so-called. Also, in other parts of the world, we'll see global cooling. So it's not simply the idea of I'm worried about temperatures rising. If you look in the centre of Canada at the moment, there's a massive cold snap, which is harder than is usually expected at this time of year. So I think that global warming is more complex than perhaps just rising world temperatures. But certainly I'm worried that we have done something to the balance of our world's equilibrium, so to say, that we might not be able to repair.
Thank you. That is the end of the speaking test.